President Cyril Ramaphosa is on a working visit to Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, to participate at the joint Southern Africa Development Community and East Africa Community Heads of State and Government Summit. The meeting is focusing on the security situation in the Eastern DRC. And further than that, the heads of states and government of SADC and East African Community agreed to meet urgently following their respective extraordinary summits last month to deliberate on a way forward regarding security situation in the DRC. The first ever summit on both Eastern and Southern Africa blocks points to the continent's deep concerns over the crisis and the standoff between Congo and neighboring Rwanda, which denies allegations it is fueling the conflict with its own troops and weapons.
Multiple engagements and forums held before.
Khayelitsha Khumalo now joins us from the Waterkloof Air Force Base in Pretoria. Khayelitsha Khumalo, good evening. Really appreciate it. Perhaps to give us a sense here, you're awaiting for the bodies of the South African soldiers to be repatriated and to land at the Waterkloof Air Force Base. What do we know so far about the status of the repatriation efforts?
Well, absolutely, Oliver. There's quite a lot of uncertainty here in this regard. As you know, that the process of repatriation is a very painstaking, it's fairly complex. There are lots of processes that must be followed in a number of countries, especially in this regard where the South African authorities, they've been working with the United Nations as a very instrumental player, facilitating this, making sure that they're moving the mortal remains from the war zone to all sorts of places, but also them just using the routes as well, where the entire process really has been really delayed, but also a very agonizing experience for the families as they really await keenly for the mortal remains really to finally come here in South Africa. They are yearning for closure. They say this is quite a very important time, but also all of these, Oliver, like you just alluded, happening at a very unprecedented period where you have the leaders from Southern Africa meeting with their counterparts from East Africa. I mean, there was a very clear understanding that it's high time that this particular conflict in the eastern parts of DRC is addressed. In fact, the chairperson of the EAC and the Kenyan President William Ruto was saying dialogue is a very key route here that must be really exploited, and really just in terms of making sure that they are calling for a ceasefire so that we can see all the parties as well respecting these permanent ceasefires, so that we can see the humanitarian aid as well getting through, but also the leaders. When you look at the communique from the foreign affairs ministers, we do understand the heads of states, they will reaffirm those particular pointers, the issue around the reopening of Goma airports, a very important route when it comes to the distribution aid, Oliver. As you know, that the eastern parts of DRC really has been dogged by instability for a number of years. I mean, you look at the presence of MONUSCO, which predates obviously the time of Summit DRC, which got, as you know, that there was that all-important summit in Windhoek in Namibia, where the SADC leaders decided to deploy this mission.
Yeah. What is a fascinating element of this ongoing conversation between the two regional blocs is that Rwanda, on the one hand, seems to tacitly at least support the M23 rebel group by saying things like, we understand what they're fighting for, we view them not as a rebel group or a militia of insurgencies, we view them as a liberation movement of sorts. They're fighting for the freedom of their people, and it is the government of the DRC that is to be blamed here. Where there's a fundamental disagreement on facts and a fundamental disagreement and divergence on the outlook of the ongoing conflict. That means that these conversations are likely to become and remain protracted given the deep and stark differences here. Do we have a sense about what the non-negotiables are on either side as they hope to get a ceasefire going?
Well, absolutely, Oliver. It's a very complex situation in the eastern parts of DRC, especially when you look at the animosity between Kinshasa and Kigali. But it goes back to those two key instruments, the Rwanda process, Oliver, of course, led by the incoming AU chairperson and Angolan President João Lourenço. The Rwanda process was supposed to make sure that DRC leader Felix Tshisekedi, alongside his counterparts, President Paul Kagame, they do meet. But obviously, those particular meetings, we haven't seen any because of all these differences from these two capitals. Because what has been really the accusation from Kinshasa is that Kigali is supporting M23. And then from the side of Kigali, the issue of the presence of FDLR in Congo. So where they're saying the Congolese authorities, they are supporting this particular group, which is a massive threat for Rwanda's security. So hence the RDF has been really much involved in this regard. So, but also you do have another process, Oliver, led by the former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta. That's of course the Nairobi process. So that process is very clear when it comes to the involvement of the non-state parties. So it really just boils down in making sure that there is an understanding with your M23 and other militia groupings, because you have the concern of the proliferation of these militia groupings in the eastern parts of Congo. But also when you go back to the points that have been emphasized by the ministers, at least the foreign affairs ministers, is the issue of making sure that, for example, the consensus and also the confidence building measures must be put in place, but also discouraging the inflammatory talks from the leaders in the region. Understand that this conflict really does have the far-reaching consequences. Already you do have quite a number of people displaced, where the UN is saying over 400,000 people are displaced. And obviously, it's a humanitarian catastrophe.
Yeah, that's SABC News reporter Kalihle Kumalo from the Waterkloof Air Force Base in Tshwane.